Most misunderstood Boss 429 engine. Are you ready to uncover the secrets behind the most misunderstood Boss 429 engine? This legendary powerhouse was built for NASCAR domination. But why did it fail to live up to expectations on the street? With its massive 429 cubic inch displacement, semi-hemispherical combustion chambers, and a Holley 735 CFM carburetor, the Boss 429 looked unstoppable on paper. Yet, it struggled to deliver the torque and performance expected from a high-performance muscle car, often overshadowed by the smaller and more nimble Cobra jets. How could such an advanced design fail to capture the hearts of street racers and drag enthusiasts? Was it the oversized ports, the heavy rotating assembly, or simply the wrong application of an otherwise brilliant engine? Let's dive deep into the technical details, the challenges Ford faced, and the untold stories of racers who tried to tame this misunderstood beast. Don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts on what made the Boss 429 engine so misunderstood. Follow Muscle Car Masters channel for more deep dives into the greatest engines in American muscle cars. Birth of the Boss 429. Boss 429 story starts with fierce competition in the late 1960s, a time when horsepower meant everything. Chrysler had taken NASCAR by storm with its 426 Hemi, a powerhouse that gave Chrysler a winning edge thanks to its unique hemispherical combustion chambers and high-rev capabilities. Ford couldn't sit back and watch their rivals dominate. They needed something big, something extraordinary to not just compete, but to reclaim the track. Enter the Boss 429. But what made this engine so special? And why do some still call it the most misunderstood 429 engine Ford ever built? The answer lies in a high-stakes game of engineering and innovation. When Bunky Knudsen joined Ford from GM in 1968, his mandate was simple: build an engine that would dominate NASCAR. Ford engineers went to work on what they hoped would be the greatest 429 engine ever made. The result was a 429 cubic inch engine with Hemi-style, opposing valve aluminum heads, and a slightly hemispherical combustion chamber, designed to breathe at high RPMs. Paired with a 735 CFM Holley 4-barrel carburetor, this engine was capable of producing upwards of 500 horsepower, although Ford conservatively rated it at 375 to manage insurance and regulatory concerns. Building the engine was only the beginning. For NASCAR homologation rules, Ford needed to install the Boss 429 engine in at least 500 production cars available to the public, and the Mustang was chosen as the carrier. But there was a problem. The Boss 429 was too big for the Mustang's engine bay. Ford's contracted performance partner, Carcraft, had to perform what could only be called surgical modifications. The shock towers were moved, new upper and lower control arms were designed, and the battery was relocated to the trunk. All this just to make room for the massive Boss 429. Despite these modifications, the engine was still a tight fit. It had to be positioned 1 inch higher and further forward than Ford's 428 Cobra jet engine, affecting the car's balance. This was an engine built to run wide open on NASCAR's super speedways, but fitting it into a street Mustang posed serious challenges. The Boss 429 Mustangs were equipped with heavy-duty front sway bars, large-diameter spindles, and Magnum 500 wheels to handle the extra weight and increased stresses. Even the hood was customized with a prominent scoop to feed air into the semi-Hemi heads. Beyond the physical modifications, Ford introduced special components for durability and performance. Boss 429 engine used forged steel for its cross-drilled crankshaft and rods, reinforced by 4-bolt main caps. This was built for endurance under extreme conditions, but it also meant the engine was heavy, and didn't respond well to typical street-level modifications. Ford did try to tame it with hydraulic cams for street use, but the engine's oversized ports, which were perfect for high-speed racing, led to disappointing low-end torque and sluggish performance on the street. Interestingly, one unique feature of Boss 429 was its Cooper ring and O-ring head sealing system, which eliminated traditional head gaskets. This design helped the engine handle high pressures and maintain superior sealing, an ideal setup for racing, but another factor that made it difficult to maintain for average car owners. Ford dealerships simply weren't equipped to handle this kind of engine, adding to the misunderstood nature of the Boss 429. In the end, Ford only produced around 1,350 of these Mustangs across the 1969 and 1970 model years, with about half of them featuring a more aggressive T-code engine design with lighter conrods and solid cams. While the Boss 429 Mustang was more than capable on the track, its NASCAR-oriented design made it a challenge on the street, leaving it as a car both revered and misunderstood by enthusiasts and drivers alike. Why it fell short. So, if Ford poured so much engineering and ambition into the Boss 429, why did it struggle on the street? Why do some call it the most misunderstood 429 engine Ford ever built? First, let's talk about the Boss 429's NASCAR-specific design. Built with a 385 series big block foundation, the engine featured hemispherical combustion chambers and massive aluminum heads with large ports and valves, perfect for high-rev, open-throttle races. These heads allowed the Boss 429 engine to rev up to 6,000 RPM, but the design made it a high RPM beast, not a low-end torque monster. Great for NASCAR. On the street? Not so much. Ford tried to tame it with a 735 CFM Holley carburetor and a hydraulic cam, but the engine still felt sluggish at lower speeds. The port and valve size also became one of its biggest weaknesses for street performance. Ford had designed the Boss 429 to take in as much air as possible at high RPMs, but on the street, this meant it struggled to generate torque at low speeds. When drivers hit the gas, they didn't feel the explosive launch they might get from a 428 Cobra jet or even a Boss 302. In fact, the Boss 429's oversized ports ended up starving the engine of the air it needed for responsive low-end power. This design, which was excellent for NASCAR's long, high-speed straights, became a liability for the street. Another issue? The tight fit of the Boss 429 in the Mustang's engine bay. To fit this massive engine, Ford enlisted car craft, who had to cut and modify the shock towers, move the battery to the trunk, and shift the engine up and forward. These modifications added weight and affected the car's handling, making it front-heavy and challenging to steer on tight turns. The Mustang's suspension was heavily modified to accommodate the Boss 429's size and weight. But even with reinforced spindles and large sway bars, the car struggled to balance the added heft. These modifications made routine maintenance a chore. Simple tasks like changing spark plugs became time-consuming and labor-intensive. Ford's engineers also had to reinforce the engine to handle the stresses of racing. They added forged pistons, a cross-drilled steel crankshaft, and half-inch bolts for the massive rods, resulting in a powerful but heavy rotating assembly. This heavy assembly limited the engine's ability to respond to cam and induction changes, a problem that disappointed many drag racers who expected it to perform better. According to drag racing legend Sam Oxier Jr., even with custom modifications, the Boss 429 engine struggled to produce the torque necessary for competitive quarter-mile times, and it was often slower than Ford's other performance engines. Then there was the misstep with the initial valve springs. Ford shipped the first batch of Boss 429 engines with springs that couldn't handle the engine's high RPM demands. These springs limited the RPMs to around 4,500, far below the intended 6,000 RPM redline. This flaw led to poor performance and further damaged the Boss 429's reputation. While Ford eventually corrected the valve springs, the initial misstep left a lasting mark on the engine's image, especially among early buyers. Let's also not forget the cooling challenges. The tight engine bay had limited airflow, and many owners reported overheating during extended street driving. In warmer climates, this became a common issue, requiring aftermarket cooling solutions that added to the overall cost and complexity of ownership. The Boss 429 simply wasn't designed for the frequent stop-and-go driving of city streets. The misunderstood Boss 429 engine also had its own unique sealing system. Instead of traditional head gaskets, Ford used Cooper rings and O-rings around the cylinders, designed for maximum pressure sealing. This setup was ideal for high-stress racing, but challenging for average street mechanics. Most Ford dealerships didn't have technicians trained to handle such a specialized system, leaving some owners without support for even basic repairs. This lack of trained support only added to the perception of the Boss 429 as a high-maintenance engine. Lastly, company politics played a role. By 1969, Ford was moving away from the proven 427 SOHC known as the Cammer, which had been banned from NASCAR but excelled in drag racing. The decision to push the Boss 429 as Ford's new racing engine meant that Ford stopped supporting the Cammer, even though it was a favorite among racers for its reliability and power. Many racers tried the Boss 429, but eventually returned to the Cammer, as it responded better to standard modifications and was easier to tune. Ford's shift to the Boss 429 over the Cammer left some racers and fans questioning if this latest and greatest 429 engine was truly an upgrade. Redemption and legacy. How did an engine that fell short on the street and drag strip turn into a legendary piece of Ford history? The early 1970s saw the Boss 429 quietly fade from Ford's spotlight. Ford's focus shifted, and NASCAR rules moved towards smaller engines, leaving this high-rev, big-block marvel with nowhere to go. But its story didn't end there. By the early 1980s, the National Hot Rod Association, NHRA, changed its rules, setting a 500 cubic inch limit for pro stock racing. This shift gave the greatest Boss 429 engine a second chance to prove itself. Legendary racers like Ronnie Sox and Bob Glidden embraced the challenge, pushing the Boss 429 to new heights. Sox, known for his skill behind the wheel, took a Boss-powered Ford Mustang and claimed the IHRA Pro Stock Championship in 1981. Then came Bob Glidden, a tuner who would redefine what the Boss 429 could do. Glidden's Ford Thunderbird, tuned with a 500 cubic inch of the Boss 429, dominated the NHRA Pro Stock Series from 1985 to 1989, capturing multiple championships. Glidden and his team unlocked the potential hidden within the Boss 429's massive Hemi heads, aggressive solid camshaft, and reinforced internals. Under Glidden's expertise, this most misunderstood 429 engine became a force to be reckoned with, finally delivering the performance it was designed for. The Boss 429 had gone from failure to legend on the drag strip, proving its worth where it belonged, at full throttle. As for collectors and muscle car enthusiasts, the Boss 429 Mustang became something more than just a car. Its limited production numbers, the extensive modifications required to fit the engine, and its bold design made it one of the rarest and most coveted Mustangs ever built. This machine was not only a representation of Ford's racing ambition, but also a symbol of engineering daring. Prices soared at auctions, with some models fetching over $400,000, showcasing its appeal and legendary status among collectors. Today, the Boss 429 is remembered not for its early missteps, but for the unique place it carved out in Ford's history and muscle car culture. Despite its struggles on the street, the Boss 429's striking design, Semi-hemispherical heads, and rare Cooper ring sealing system set it apart from every other engine Ford produced. With proper tuning and the right applications, it evolved from misunderstood to legendary, achieving a level of admiration and respect that few engines can claim. So, was the Boss 429 engine a misunderstood masterpiece or a muscle car misfit? From NASCAR ambitions to everyday road struggles, the Boss 429's journey is filled with highs and lows. Despite its iconic hemi-style cylinder heads, massive 2.23-inch intake valves, and a forged steel crankshaft that delivered a conservative 375 horsepower, this engine often fell short on the street. It was built for the super speedways, where it could breathe at high RPMs, not for low-end torque. Engine modifications were costly and complex, requiring special tuning to unlock its full potential, and few owners were prepared to make the leap. Yet, over the years, the misunderstood 429 engine gained a legendary status, admired for its raw engineering and sheer ambition. Today, its rarity, with only 1,359 units produced, and its commanding auction values have made it a true collector's piece. What do you think? Was the Boss 429 engine ahead of its time, or was it a misunderstood marvel? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Muscle Car Masters for more iconic stories.